Life was simple before Karen moved in next door. My name is Michael, and for 15 years, I had run a small animal rescue on 20 acres of rolling hills in rural Tennessee. The morning mist would settle over our pastures like a gentle blanket, and the only sounds were roosters crowing and the contented snorts of rescued pigs finding peace after lives of neglect. My son Danny was 17 then, tall and lanky with hands that could gentle the most frightened animals. He had grown up among these creatures, bottle-feeding abandoned goats and mucking stalls before school. Every morning, he would walk the fence line with me, checking on our charges with the careful eye of someone who understood that trust, once broken, takes patience to rebuild. But the crown jewel of our sanctuary was Gertrude. She was a 400-pound Hampshire boar we had rescued from a factory farm 3 years earlier. When she first arrived, she was skittish and aggressive, scarred from years of confinement and rough handling. But Danny had worked magic with her. He would sit by her pen for hours, talking softly and offering treats until she learned to trust again. Gertrude became our gentle giant. Despite her massive size and intimidating tusks, she was docile as a house cat. Children from the local school would visit, and she would let them scratch behind her ears while she closed her eyes in contentment. She followed Danny around like a loyal dog, and at night, she would rest her enormous head against the fence just to be close to him. Then Karen bought the property next door. She arrived on a Tuesday morning in a white BMW, stepping out in designer heels that had no business on rural dirt roads. Karen was maybe 50, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of sharp features that suggested a lifetime of getting her way through intimidation. She wore clothes that cost more than most people made in a month, and she surveyed our property like a general studying enemy territory. The complaints started within a week. First came the passive-aggressive notes slipped under our door, written in careful script on expensive stationery. The farm smells were offensive. The animal noises disrupted her peace. Surely there were zoning violations involved in operating such a facility. I knocked on her door to introduce myself properly, hopping to clear the air. Karen opened it just wide enough to speak through the crack, her nose wrinkled in disgust. "I moved here for peace and quiet," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having her complaints taken seriously. "Not to live next to some illegal petting zoo." "Ma'am, we are a licensed rescue facility," I explained patiently. "We have all the proper permits and inspections. Maybe if you visited, you would see that we take excellent care of our animals." Her eyes narrowed. "I do not need to visit anything. I need you to get rid of those creatures before I call the authorities." The door slammed in my face. Within days, Karen was documenting everything with her phone. She would pace the property line, filming our animals and muttering into the device about health violations and dangerous conditions. She made calls to the county, to animal control, to anyone who would listen to her complaints. Danny tried to be diplomatic. When he saw her filming, he would wave and offer to answer any questions she might have. But Karen's hostility toward him was particularly vicious. She would point her phone directly at his face and make loud comments about dangerous teenagers and unsupervised minors handling violent animals. The local community knew us well. We had been part of this rural area for 15 years, helping neighbors with sick livestock and providing educational programs for children. Sheriff Williams had known Danny since he was in diapers. When Karen called with her first official complaint, he drove out more as a courtesy than from any real concern. "Michael," he said, shaking his head as we walked past the pens, "that woman has called my office 6 times this week. What exactly is her problem?" "I wish I knew, Tom," I replied. She moved in next to a working farm and seemed surprised that it smells like a farm. Sheriff Williams watched Gertrude lazily scratch her back against a fence post. "Well, keep doing what you are doing. Your permits are in order, and I have never had a single complaint about this place in 15 years." But Karen was not discouraged by official dismissal. She had money, connections, and an unshakable belief that the world should bend to her will. I could see her through her kitchen window, packing and gesturing while she talked on the phone, building her case with the methodical determination of someone who had never learned to accept no for an answer. The storm clouds were gathering, and I had no idea how devastating the coming tempest would be. Karen escalated her campaign with military precision. Within 2 weeks of her first complaint, she had filed formal reports with animal control, claiming our animals were diseased and dangerous. She described Gertrude as a vicious attack pig that posed a threat to the entire neighborhood. Dr. Martinez from Animal Control arrived on a Thursday morning, clipboard in hand, and a weary expression that suggested he had dealt with Karen before. He walked through our facilities with professional thoroughness, checking vaccination records and examining the animals. "Everything looks excellent, Michael," he said, scratching Gertrude behind the ears as she leaned into his touch. "This so-called vicious pig seems to be one of the gentlest animals I have ever encountered." "Tell that to our neighbor," I replied. Dr. Martinez sighed. "I have received 14 separate reports from Karen Mitchell in the past month. Each one has been completely without merit. I am going to have to start charging her filing fees if this continues." But Karen was not deterred by official rejection. She began a more direct approach, and that is when things turned dangerous. I first noticed the objects on Tuesday morning during feeding time. Rocks and pieces of broken glass lay scattered near the animal pens, clearly thrown from the direction of Karen's property. The animals were agitated, especially Gertrude, who paced nervously and refused to eat her breakfast. Danny was furious when I showed him the evidence. "She is trying to hurt them," he said, his young voice tight with anger. "We have to stop her." That afternoon, Danny caught her in the act. He was cleaning the chicken coop when he heard a loud crash from Gertrude's pen. Looking up, he saw Karen standing at the fence line, her arm cocked back to throw another rock at the frightened boar. "Hey," Danny shouted, running toward her. "Stop that right now." Karen spun around, her face twisted with rage. "Do not tell me what to do, you little brat." "You are hurting innocent animals," Danny said, his voice shaking but determined. "I am calling the sheriff." That is when Karen struck him. Her manicured hand cracked across his face with surprising force, leaving red marks on his cheek. Danny stumbled backward, more shocked than hurt. "Touch me again and I will have you arrested for assault," Karen hissed. "This is my property and I will defend it however I see fit." I arrived just as Danny was pulling out his phone to call 911. Karen was already walking away, but she turned back with a smile that chilled my blood. "Your son just assaulted me," she called out sweetly. "I have witnesses." Of course she did not. But over the following days, Karen's harassment campaign intensified. She began parking her BMW across our driveway, forcing delivery trucks to park on the road. When the feed store tried to make their weekly delivery, she positioned herself in the driver's path and refused to move. "This is a public safety hazard," she told the confused driver. "These people are running an illegal operation." She started recruiting allies among the newer residents, city transplants who had moved to the country for the scenery, but not the reality of rural life. Karen organized a petition drive, going door to door with printed flyers describing our dangerous animal horde and unsafe conditions. Most of our longtime neighbors refused to sign, but a few newcomers were swayed by Karen's polished presentation and official-sounding concerns. She gathered 12 signatures demanding that the county investigate our illegal commercial operation. Sheriff Williams visited again the following week, this time less amused than before. "Michael, I am going to level with you," he said, leaning against his patrol car. "That woman is making my life miserable. She calls the office daily, files complaints with the state, and has now got the county commissioners asking questions." "Tom, you know we are not doing anything wrong," I said. "I know that, and you know that, but Karen Mitchell has connections. Her brother-in-law is some big-shot lawyer in Nashville, and she is not afraid to make threats about lawsuits and civil rights violations." He paused, watching Danny feed the goats with gentle patience. "Here is what worries me," Sheriff Williams continued. "This woman is not rational. She has escalated every single interaction, and people like that do not just give up. They get more desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things." His words proved prophetic sooner than any of us expected. Karen's next escalation came in the form of inspectors. She somehow convinced 3 people in official-looking uniforms to visit our property, claiming to represent state animal welfare authorities. They arrived without warning on a Saturday morning, clipboards in hand and badges that looked legitimate enough to fool most people. But I noticed something off about them immediately. Real inspectors schedule visits in advance and carry proper identification. These people seemed more interested in filming everything than actually inspecting anything. And Karen accompanied them with barely concealed excitement, like a child showing off a new toy. She pointed out every minor imperfection, every slightly worn fence board, every mud puddle where animals had been playing. "You can see the unsanitary conditions," she told her fake inspectors, "and that dangerous pig has been threatening neighborhood children." Gertrude was in her pen, peacefully eating apples that Danny had brought her. She looked up at the strangers with mild curiosity, showing no sign of aggression whatsoever. That is when I realized this was not an inspection. It was a setup. And Karen was about to spring her trap. The attack came without warning on a bright Saturday morning in May. I was in the barn organizing feed when I heard Danny shouting from Gertrude's pen. His voice carried a note of panic that made my blood run cold. I rushed outside to find chaos. Karen stood near Gertrude's enclosure with a heavy metal pipe in her hands, the same type used for fence construction. Her 3 fake inspectors flanked her with cameras rolling, documenting everything. But what froze me in horror was the sight of Gertrude. The massive boar was backing away from Karen, confused and frightened. A trail of blood ran down the side of her head where the pipe had already connected once. Her left eye was swelling shut, and she was making distressed sounds I had never heard from her before. Danny was inside the pen, his arms spread wide, trying to position himself between Karen and the injured animal. "Get away from her," he shouted. "She is hurt, she is scared." "That animal attacked me," Karen screamed back, raising the pipe again. "I am defending myself from a vicious beast." But I could see the truth in her eyes. This was not self-defense. This was calculated cruelty, performed for the cameras. She wanted to provoke Gertrude into aggressive behavior that could be used as evidence against us. Danny must have seen the pipe coming down again because he lunged forward, trying to shield Gertrude with his own body. The metal caught him across the face with a sickening crack. Blood exploded from his nose as he stumbled backward, his hands flying to his face. "Danny!" I screamed, running toward the pen. But Karen was not finished. With the methodical precision of someone following a rehearsed plan, she struck Gertrude again, this time connecting directly with her eye. The boar's scream of agony echoed across the valley, a sound that will haunt my nightmares forever. That is when Gertrude snapped. 400 pounds of wounded animal instinct took over, and she charged toward Karen with blind fury. But the fence held, and Karen danced backward, staying just out of reach. "Look at that," she shouted to her cameras. "Vicious, dangerous, this proves everything I have been saying." I reached Danny just as he collapsed to his knees, blood streaming through his fingers. Deep gashes ran across his cheek where the pipe had torn his skin. His nose was clearly broken, already swelling to twice its normal size. "Dad," he whispered, his voice thick with blood and shock. "She hurt Gertrude. She hurt her on purpose." One of Karen's fake inspectors stepped forward, and I recognized him from her dinner parties. These were not officials at all. They were her friends from the city, recruited to play roles in her elaborate deception. "This was all self-defense," the man said into his camera. "The animal became violent and attacked this innocent woman. The teenager tried to stop her from protecting herself." Karen stood in the wreckage of her orchestrated attack, not a trace of remorse in her cold eyes. She had planned this moment carefully, from the fake inspectors to the metal pipe to the strategic positioning of cameras. This was premeditated assault disguised as animal control. But the worst was yet to come. Gertrude was backing into the corner of her pen, her head shaking violently as blood continued to flow from her damaged eye. The trauma was causing her to behave erratically, snapping at shadows and charging the fence whenever anyone approached. The gentle giant who had once let children pet her was gone, replaced by a creature wild with pain and confusion. Karen had not just physically damaged Gertrude. She had destroyed her spirit, turning years of careful rehabilitation into a nightmare of fear and aggression. By the time the real authorities arrived, Karen had already spun her version of events. She showed them her torn clothing, scratches she had inflicted on herself, and hours of edited video that made us look like dangerous animal hoarders who had attacked an innocent woman. The ambulance took Danny to the hospital, where doctors worked for 3 hours to repair the damage to his face. 17 stitches closed the gashes on his cheek. His nose required surgery to reset the broken bones. The physical scars would heal, but something deeper had been damaged that day. Meanwhile, the emergency veterinarian examined Gertrude with grim professionalism. The metal pipe had ruptured blood vessels in her eye, causing permanent damage to her vision. Infection was already setting in, and her traumatic brain injury was causing unpredictable behavioral changes. "I am sorry," Dr. Peterson said, his voice heavy with regret. "The eye cannot be saved, and the behavioral changes. She may never be safe around people again." The veterinary bills emptied our savings account in a single day. $3,000 for Danny's medical treatment, $2,500 for Gertrude's emergency surgery, hundreds more for ongoing care and medication. But Karen was not finished with us yet. While we spent that terrible night in hospital waiting rooms, she was already meeting with her lawyers, crafting a narrative that would paint her as the victim and us as the villains. By Monday morning, we faced criminal charges. Karen claimed that Danny had assaulted her during her legitimate inspection of our dangerous facility. Her fake inspectors backed up her story with carefully edited video footage. The system that should have protected a wounded teenager and an innocent animal instead rallied to defend the very person who had attacked them. Justice, it seemed, could be purchased with the right connections and enough money for expensive lawyers. But in that moment, As I held my injured son and watched our beloved Gertrude pace her pen in confused agony, something fundamental changed inside me. The naive belief that truth and justice would prevail died alongside my faith in the system. If the courts would not protect us, then I would have to find another way. The courthouse became a monument to purchase justice. Karen arrived each morning in a different designer outfit, flanked by lawyers who charged more per hour than most people earned in a week. Her legal team had transformed the narrative completely, painting us as dangerous animal hoarders who had viciously attacked an innocent woman trying to protect the community. The prosecutor, a young man fresh out of law school, seemed overwhelmed by the complexity of the case. Karen's lawyers buried him in paperwork, witness statements, and carefully edited video footage that made her look like a victim defending herself from wild animals and violent teenagers. "Mr. Henderson," the prosecutor said during our pretrial meeting, "we need to discuss a plea agreement for your son." "A plea agreement?" I stared at him in disbelief. "My son was the victim. That woman broke his nose with a metal pipe." "The evidence shows your son interfered with a legitimate animal welfare inspection and became physically aggressive when Ms. Mitchell tried to defend herself." I wanted to scream. The evidence showed nothing of the sort, but Karen's money had purchased a different version of reality. Her fake inspectors testified under oath that they were licensed officials responding to community complaints. Her video footage, heavily edited, made Danny look like the aggressor. Meanwhile, the charges against Karen disappeared like morning mist. Her lawyer argued self-defense, claiming she feared for her life when confronted by dangerous animals and an unstable teenager. The prosecutor accepted this explanation without question. Danny sat beside me in the courtroom, his face still bandaged from the surgery. The 17-year-old who had once faced down angry bulls without flinching now jumped at sudden sounds and avoided eye contact with strangers. The confident young man who had devoted his life to helping wounded animals was gone, replaced by someone who flinched whenever doors slammed or voices were raised. "I keep having nightmares," he whispered to me during a recess. "I see her face right before she swung that pipe. She was smiling, Dad. She enjoyed hurting us." The psychological evaluation ordered by the court confirmed what I already knew. Danny was suffering from severe trauma, experiencing flashbacks and panic attacks that made it impossible for him to work with the animals he once loved. The boy who had rehabilitated Gertrude through patience and kindness could no longer enter her pen without breaking down in tears. Gertrude's condition was deteriorating as well. The infection in her damaged eye had spread despite aggressive antibiotic treatment. Her left side vision was completely gone, and the brain trauma was causing increasingly erratic behavior. She would charge the fence without provocation, bash her head against the walls of her shelter, and refuse to eat for days at a time. Dr. Peterson delivered the news I had been dreading during a routine checkup. "Michael, I have to recommend euthanasia," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "She is suffering, both physically and psychologically. The aggression is getting worse, and she is becoming a danger to herself and others." "She was the gentlest animal you could imagine before Karen attacked her," I said, watching Gertrude pace frantically in her pen. "I know, but that animal is gone. What we have now is a creature in constant pain, confused and frightened, lashing out at a world that has hurt her beyond repair." The irony was devastating. Karen had claimed Gertrude was dangerous, and through her own actions, she had made that lie come true. The gentle giant who once nuzzled children and followed Danny like a loyal dog was now exactly the monster Karen had always said she was. Meanwhile, Karen conducted her victory tour through town. At the grocery store, the bank, the post office, she regaled anyone who would listen with stories of her heroic stand against dangerous animal hoarders. "I saved this community from a tragedy waiting to happen," I heard her tell the cashier at the hardware store. "That teenager was completely out of control, and that pig would have killed someone eventually." Her voice carried that particular satisfaction of someone who believes they have done the world a favor by destroying innocent lives. The legal bills continued mounting. Even though we were technically the victims, we still needed lawyers to defend against Karen's civil lawsuit. She was demanding $1 million in damages for emotional trauma, claiming that our attack had left her unable to sleep or function normally. Our insurance company, faced with Karen's aggressive legal team, was pressuring us to settle out of court. They suggested we accept responsibility for the incident and pay Karen a substantial sum to make the whole thing disappear. "It would be cheaper than fighting," our lawyer explained. "Even if we win, the legal costs will bankrupt you." So this was justice in America. The victim pays the attacker to stop attacking. The innocent apologize to the guilty. The system designed to protect the vulnerable instead rewards those with money and connections. But as I sat in that sterile conference room, listening to lawyers discuss the dollar value of my son's suffering and my animal's torment, something clicked into place. A cold clarity settled over me like winter frost. If the legal system had abdicated its responsibility to deliver justice, then perhaps it was time to explore older, more fundamental forms of accountability. Karen had taught me that rules only apply to those without power. Now it was time for her to learn what happens when you hurt someone who has nothing left to lose. The plan began forming in my mind, terrible and perfect in its simplicity. Observation became my obsession. For weeks, I studied Karen's routines with the methodical patience of a predator learning its prey. She was a creature of rigid habits, and habits create vulnerabilities. Every morning at 7:15, she emerged from her house in designer workout clothes for her power walk around the neighborhood. She carried her phone and a small can of pepper spray, documenting anything she considered evidence of rural life's offenses against her sensibilities. At 9:30, she would return for her coffee ritual on the back patio, positioned perfectly to stare directly at our property. She would sit there for exactly 1 hour, making phone calls and taking photographs of our animals through expensive binoculars. Afternoons brought her garden parties with other city transplants, gatherings where she held court about her victory over the dangerous animal people. Her voice would carry across the valley as she recounted her heroic tale of subduing violent teenagers and vicious pigs. But I also noticed what she tried to hide, the way she flinched when our rooster crowed, how she took the longest possible route to her mailbox to avoid walking near our fence, the white-knuckled grip on her pepper spray whenever she heard Gertrude's snorts and grunts from the direction of our property. Karen was terrified of large animals. Her aggression the day of the attack had been fueled by fear and adrenaline, performed for cameras with fake inspectors as backup. Strip away her audience and her safety net, and she was just another city woman afraid of anything larger than a poodle. Fear can be cultivated like any other crop, and I was about to become a farmer. Meanwhile, Gertrude's condition continued deteriorating. The brain trauma was causing increasingly unpredictable behavior. She would be calm for days, then suddenly fly into rages that left her enclosure damaged and herself exhausted. The infection in her ruined eye refused to heal completely, leaving her with constant pain that no amount of medication could touch. Dr. Peterson visited weekly now, monitoring her decline with professional concern. "She is becoming more dangerous," he warned during his latest visit. "Yesterday she charged the fence so hard she nearly broke through. If she gets loose." "She would not hurt anyone intentionally," I insisted. "Michael, this is not the same animal you rescued. The trauma has changed her brain chemistry. She is operating on pure instinct now, and that instinct says everything is a threat." But as I watched Gertrude pace her enclosure, something occurred to me. Karen had spent months claiming our gentle giant was dangerous. Her attack had made that claim reality. Now Gertrude was exactly what Karen had always said she was: 400 pounds of unpredictable fury with nothing left to lose. Perhaps it was time Karen met the monster she had created. The fence repair was a work of art. I spent 3 days identifying the section closest to Karen's property line, then carefully weakening specific boards while leaving them standing. To any casual observer, the fence looked perfectly intact, but a determined 400-pound boar could break through with minimal effort. I also began strategic feeding. Instead of keeping Gertrude contained during her increasingly frequent aggressive episodes, I started timing her meals to coincide with Karen's outdoor activities. Pavlov understood that behavior could be conditioned. If Gertrude associated the smell and sound of Karen's presence with feeding time, she might become very interested in visiting Karen's property. The psychological warfare began subtly. I would allow Gertrude's snorts and grunts to carry across the valley during Karen's precious coffee time, timing the sounds to interrupt her phone calls. When her dinner parties grew too loud with celebratory gloating, I would lead Gertrude to the fence line where her imposing presence cast long shadows across Karen's perfectly manicured lawn. Karen's reaction was everything I had hoped for. Her morning walks became increasingly hurried. Her patio coffee sessions moved indoors whenever Gertrude was visible. Her dinner party conversations grew more shrill as she tried to convince her guests that she was not afraid of a stupid pig behind a fence. But the phone calls to authorities revealed her growing panic. "That animal is becoming more aggressive," she told Sheriff Williams during one of her daily complaints. "It charges the fence whenever I go outside. They are obviously not controlling it properly." Sheriff Williams, now thoroughly tired of Karen's dramatics, gave her the same dismissive response she had once received about us. "Ma'am, as long as the animal stays on their property, there is nothing we can do. Maybe you should consider moving somewhere more suitable to your lifestyle." The irony was perfect. Karen, who had weaponized official indifference against us, now found herself on the receiving end of bureaucratic dismissal. Her frantic calls about dangerous animals were filed away with the same casual disregard she had helped create. Meanwhile, I continued my maintenance of the weakened fence section. A board here, a support post there, all carefully calculated to look like normal wear and tear, while ensuring that the slightest pressure would bring the whole section down. I also began documenting Gertrude's behavioral patterns. Her aggressive episodes were becoming more frequent and more intense. The damaged eye socket was causing chronic pain that drove her to bash her head against anything solid, seeking relief that never came. During these episodes, she would charge blindly at whatever caught her attention, using her massive bulk as a battering ram against perceived threats. Karen had no idea that her pristine world was about to intersect with 400 pounds of wounded fury. She had spent months claiming Gertrude was dangerous, while feeling completely safe behind our fence. Soon, she would discover the difference between claiming danger and facing it. The stage was set. The players were in position. All that remained was waiting for the perfect moment when Karen's arrogance would finally meet Gertrude's rage. Justice was coming, and it had tusks. The dinner party was Karen's masterpiece of self-congratulation. She had invited 8 couples from Nashville, city friends, who appreciated her tales of rural conquest over coffee and designer wine. Chinese lanterns illuminated her perfect patio, and catered food was arranged on tables that cost more than most people's cars. I watched from my kitchen window as Karen held court, gesturing dramatically while recounting her heroic battle against dangerous animal hoarders. Her voice carried across the valley, each embellished detail of her victory tour making my blood boil hotter. The pig was absolutely vicious, she told her rapt audience. 400 pounds of pure aggression, and the teenager was completely out of control, trying to use that monster as a weapon against innocent people. Her guests murmured appropriately, safe in their designer clothes and city ignorance, never suspecting that the very animal Karen was describing paced just 100 yards away, driven by pain and rage into exactly the monster she claimed it had always been. That afternoon, Karen had escalated her harassment to a new level. While I was in town buying feed, she had thrown poisoned meat over the fence near Gertrude's pen. The veterinarian confirmed that the hamburger contained enough rat poison to kill a horse, let alone aggravate an already damaged nervous system. Dr. Peterson had pumped Gertrude's stomach and administered activated charcoal, but the poison had done its work. The already traumatized boar was now in a state of chemically induced psychosis, her remaining rational thought processes dissolving into pure animal instinct. She is completely unpredictable now, Dr. Peterson warned me. The poison has affected her brain chemistry on top of the existing trauma. She could become violent without any warning whatsoever. Perfect, Karen had just armed her own destruction. As the dinner party reached its peak of celebration, I made my final preparations. The weakened fence section had been my masterpiece of patient sabotage, but it still required the right trigger. I positioned myself near Gertrude's pen with a bucket of her favorite treats, waiting for the perfect moment. Karen was in the middle of describing how she had heroically defended herself with a metal pipe when I rattled the treat bucket near the damaged fence. Gertrude's head snapped up, her remaining good eye focusing on the sound with laser intensity. She charged the fence with 400 pounds of momentum, and the carefully weakened boards exploded outward like matchsticks. Karen's perfectly intact barrier between civilization and chaos disappeared in an instant. Gertrude stood in the gap, massive and imposing, her damaged eye socket weeping blood where the poison had reopened old wounds. She was magnificent and terrible, a living embodiment of every nightmare Karen had ever claimed to face. The dinner party went silent. 8 couples in designer clothes stared at 400 pounds of wounded fury standing at the edge of their perfectly manicured world. Someone's wine glass hit the patio stones with a crystalline crash. Karen rose from her chair like a woman in a trance, her face draining of color as she faced the reality of her own lies. For months, she had claimed to be afraid of this animal. Now she could discover what real fear felt like. "Nobody move," she whispered, her voice cracking with terror. "Do not make any sudden movements." But Gertrude was beyond rational thought. The combination of brain trauma, chronic pain, and chemical poisoning had reduced her to pure predatory instinct, and her one good eye was fixed directly on Karen. The charge happened in slow motion. 400 pounds of muscle and bone and justified rage launched across the patio like a natural disaster given form. Karen's scream echoed across the valley as tons of wounded fury bore down on her with unstoppable momentum. The impact was magnificent. Karen disappeared beneath Gertrude's bulk, her designer dress shredding as she hit the patio stones. The sickening crack of breaking bones mixed with her agonized shrieks as Gertrude's weight crushed down on her legs and spine. Her dinner guests scattered like startled birds, expensive shoes slipping on spilled wine as they fled toward their cars. Cell phones appeared, recording everything, but from angles that would show only a massive animal attacking a helpless woman, not the months of calculated cruelty that had led to this moment. Karen's legs bent at angles that legs should not bend. Her spine compressed under Gertrude's weight, vertebrae grinding together with sounds that made even me wince. Blood spread across the designer stones, mixing with spilled wine and shattered glass to create a modern art masterpiece of justice delivered. "Help me," Karen screamed, her voice breaking into sobs as she realized her legs would not respond to desperate commands. "Please, someone help me." That is when I made my entrance, running across the yard with a lead rope and urgent concern painted across my face. "Oh my God, Karen," I shouted, the perfect concerned neighbor arriving just in time. "Gertrude, bad girl, get back." I made a show of struggling to control the massive animal, pulling her away from Karen's broken form with apparent difficulty. To any observer, I was the heroic neighbor risking his own safety to save a woman from a dangerous animal. But as I led Gertrude away from the wreckage, I leaned down close to Karen's ear, where only she could hear. "You should have left us alone," I whispered. Karen's eyes met mine, and in that moment she understood everything. The convenient fence failure, the perfect timing, the fact that I had appeared with exactly the right equipment to control an out-of-control animal. She opened her mouth to speak, but only blood came out. Her spine was damaged, possibly permanently. Her legs were shattered. The woman who had destroyed my son's face and blinded my gentle boar was now as broken and helpless as the creatures she had tormented. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later, but by then, Karen's fate was sealed. She would survive, but she would never again be the predator she had been. The hunter had become the hunted, and justice had finally been served by the very victim she had tried to destroy. As they loaded her onto the stretcher, I heard her whisper to the paramedic, "It was not an accident. He planned this. He let that animal." But who would believe the delirious ravings of a woman traumatized by a vicious animal attack? After all, everyone knew how dangerous that pig had always been. Karen had spent months telling everyone who would listen that Gertrude was a monster. Now she had finally met the monster she had created.